Welcome to Nancy's Classic Bedtime Stories. I'm Nancy, continuing in the essential wisdom of the Founding Fathers. Freedom and rights. I would define liberty to be a power to do as we would be done by. The definition of liberty to be the power of doing whatever the law permits, meaning the civil laws does not seem satisfactory. John Adams, letter to J.H. Tiffany, March 31st, 1819. Those who expect to reap the blessings of freedom must, like men, undergo the fatigue of supporting it. Thomas Paine, The American Crisis, No. 4, September 12, 1777. The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. It is its natural manure. Thomas Jefferson, letter to Colonel William S. Smith, November 13th, 1787. That no man should scruple or hesitate a moment to use arms in defense of so valuable a blessing as freedom, on which all the good and evil of life depends, is clearly my opinion. Yet arms should be the last resource. George Washington, letter to George Mason, April 5th, 1769. We are not to expect to be translated from despotism to liberty in a feather bed. Thomas Jefferson, letter to the Marquis de Lafayette, April 2nd, 1790. It is a common observation here, Paris, that our cause is the cause of all mankind, and that we are fighting for their liberty in defending our own. Benjamin Franklin, letter to Samuel Cooper, 1777. The people are the only sure reliance for the preservation of our liberty. Thomas Jefferson, letter to James Madison, 1787. The natural progress of things is for liberty to yield and government to gain ground. Thomas Jefferson, letter to Colonel Edward Carrington, May 27, 1788. I believe there are more instances of the abridgment of the freedom of the people by gradual and silent encroachments of those in power than by violent and sudden usurpations. James Madison, Address at the Virginia Convention, June 16, 1788. Let us dare to read, think, speak, and write. John Adams, A Dissertation on the Canon and the Feudal Law, 1765. The most important bill in our whole code is that for the diffusion of knowledge among the people. No other sure foundation can be devised for the preservation of freedom and happiness. Thomas Jefferson, letter to George Wythe, August 1786. Liberty cannot be preserved without a general knowledge among the people who have a right and a desire to know. But besides this, they have a right, an indisputable, unalienable, indefeasible, divine right to that most dreaded and envied kind of knowledge. I mean of the characters and conduct of their rulers. John Adams, A Dissertation on the Canon and Feudal Law, 1765. Our liberty depends on the freedom of the press, and that cannot be limited without being lost. Thomas Jefferson, letter to James Curry, January 28, 1786. In those wretched countries where a man cannot call his tongue his own, he can scarce call anything his own. Whosoever would overthrow the liberty of a nation must begin by subduing the freeness of speech, a thing terrible to public traitors. Benjamin Franklin, Dogwood Papers, written by Franklin in 1722 at the age of 16. I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against every form of tyranny over the mind of man. Thomas Jefferson, letter to Benjamin Rush, September 23, 1800. When people talk of the freedom of writing, speaking, or thinking, I cannot choose but laugh. No such thing ever existed. No such thing now exists, but I hope it will exist. But it must be hundreds of years after you and I shall write and speak no more. John Adams, Letter to Thomas Jefferson, July 15th, 1818. It behooves every man who values liberty of conscience for himself to resist invasions of it in the case others. Thomas Jefferson, Letter to Benjamin Rush, 1803. Freedom is not a gift bestowed upon us by other men, but a right that belongs to us by the laws of God and nature. Benjamin Franklin, Maxims and Morals, from Dr. Franklin, 1807. Kings or parliaments could not give the rights essential to happiness. We claim them from a higher source, from the King of Kings and the Lord of all the earth. They are not annexed to us by parchments and seals. They are created in us by the decrees of providence, which establish the laws of our nature. They are born with us, exist with us, and cannot be taken from us by any human power without taking our lives. John Dickinson, A Warning to the Colonies, from the Political Writings of John Dickinson, 1804. The liberty enjoyed by the people of these states of worshiping Almighty God, agreeable to their consciences, is not only among the choicest of their blessings, but also of their rights. George Washington, Message to Quakers, 1789. The fundamental source of all your errors, sophisms, and false reasoning is a total ignorance of the natural rights of mankind. Were you once to become acquainted with these, you could never entertain a thought that all men are not by nature entitled to a parity of privileges. You would be convinced that natural liberty is a gift of the beneficent Creator to the whole human race, and that civil liberty is founded in that, and cannot be wrested from any people without the most manifest violation of justice. Alexander Hamilton, The Farmer Refuted, 1775. Equality and justice. All men are created equal. Thomas Jefferson, Declaration of Independence, July 4th, 1776. There can be no truer principle than this, that every individual of the community at large has an equal right to the protection of government. Alexander Hamilton, Speech at the Constitutional Convention, June 29, 1787. All, too, will bear in mind this sacred principle, that through the liberty of the majority is in all cases to prevail, that will to be rightful must be reasonable, that the minority possess their equal rights, which equal law must protect, and to violate would be oppression. Thomas Jefferson, First Inaugural Address, March 4th, 1801. As mankind becomes more liberal, they will be more able to allow that those who conduct themselves as worthy members of the community are equally entitled to the protection of civil government. I hope ever to see America among the foremost nations in examples of justice and liberality. George Washington, Message to Catholics, 1789. God, who gave us life, gave us liberty, and can the liberties of a nation be thought secure when we have removed their only firm basis, a conviction in the minds of the people that these liberties are of the gift of God, that they are not to be violated but with his wrath? Indeed, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just, that his justice cannot sleep forever. Thomas Jefferson, regarding the issue of slavery, Notes on the State of Virginia, 1781. Slavery is such an atrocious debasement of human nature that its very extirpation, if not performed with solicitous care, may sometimes open a source of serious evils. Benjamin Franklin, an address to the public from the Pennsylvania Society for Promoting the Abolition of Slavery and the Relief of Free Negroes Unlawfully Held in Bondage, 1782. It being among my first wishes to see some plan adopted by which slavery in this country may be abolished by law. George Washington, letter to John F. Mercer, September 9, 1786. Every master of slaves is born a petty tyrant. They bring the judgment of heaven upon a country. As nations cannot be rewarded or punished in the next world, they must be in this. By an inevitable chain of causes and effects, Providence punishes national sins by national calamities. George Mason, from Debates of Constitutional Convention, August 22nd, 1787. Negro slavery is an evil of colossal magnitude. John Adams, letter to Abigail Adams, 1819. The turpitude, the inhumanity, the cruelty, and the infamy of the African commerce and slaves have been so impressively represented to the public by the highest powers of eloquence that nothing that I can say would increase the just odium in which it is and ought to be held. Every measure of prudence, therefore, ought to be assumed for the eventual total extirpation of slavery from the United States. John Adams, letter to Robert J. Evans, June 8, 1819. During the course of a long life in which I have made observations on public affairs, it has appeared to me that almost every war between the Indians and the whites has been occasioned by some injustice of the latter toward the former. It is indeed extremely imprudent in us to quarrel with them for their lands, as they are generally willing to sell, and sell as such good bargains, and a war with them is so mischievous to us, in unsettling frequently a great part of our frontier, and reducing the inhabitants to poverty and distress, and is besides so expensive that it is much cheaper as well as more honest to buy their lands than to take them by force. Benjamin Franklin, from his autobiography. I believe in the equality of man, and I believe that religious duties consist in doing justice, loving mercy, and endeavoring to make our fellow creatures happy. Thomas Paine, The Age of Reason, 1794 to 1795. Justice is indiscriminately due to all, without regard to numbers, wealth, or rank. John Jay, in Georgia versus Brailsford, 1794. Equal and exact justice to all men, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, freedom of the person under the protection of the habeas corpus, and trial by juries impartially selected, these principles form the bright constellation that has gone before us. Thomas Jefferson, First Inaugural Address, March 4th, 1801. Facts are stubborn things, and whatever may be our wishes, our inclinations, or the dictates of our passions, they cannot alter the state of facts and evidence. John Adams, from his defense of the British soldiers in the Boston Massacre trials, December 1770. It is better to toss up cross and pile, heads or tails, in a cause than to refer to it a judge whose mind is warped by any motive whatever in that particular case. But the common sense of 12 honest men gives still a better chance of just decision than the hazard of cross and pile. Thomas Jefferson, Notes on the State of Virginia, 1785. Injustice, wrong, injury excites the feeling of resentment as naturally and necessarily as frost and ice excite the feeling of cold, as fire excites heat, and as both excite pain. A man may have the faculty of concealing his resentment or suppressing it, but he must and ought to feel it. Nay, he ought to indulge it, to cultivate it. It is a duty. His person, his property, his liberty, his reputation are not safe without it. He ought, for his own security and honor, and for the public good, to punish those who injure him, unless they repent, and then he should forgive, having satisfaction and compensation. Revenge is unlawful. It is the same with communities. They ought to resent and punish. John Adams, from his diary, March 4th, 1776. The judicial power ought to be distinct from both the legislative and executive, and independent upon both, that so it may be a check upon both as both should be checks upon that. John Adams, Thoughts on Government, 1776. It is emphatically the province and duty of the judicial department to say what the law is. If two laws conflict with each other, the courts must decide on the operation of each. This is of the very essence of judicial duty. John Marshall, in Marbury v. Madison, 1803. Religion, morality, and virtue. No people can be bound to acknowledge and adore the invisible hand which conducts the affairs of men more than the people of the United States. Every step by which they have advanced to the character of an independent nation seems to have been distinguished by some token of providential agency. George Washington, First Inaugural Address, April 30th, 1789. We are not in a world ungoverned by the laws and power of a superior agent. Our efforts are in his hand and directed by it, and he will give them their effect in his own time. Thomas Jefferson, Letter to David Barrow, May 1st, 1815. There is in all men something like a natural principle which inclines them to devotion or the worship of some unseen power. Benjamin Franklin, Articles of Belief and Acts of Religion, November 20th, 1728. No man has a more perfect reliance on the all-wise and powerful dispensations of the Supreme Being than I have not thinks his, than I, I'm sorry. Let me begin again. No man has a more perfect reliance on the all-wise and powerful dispensations of the Supreme Being than I have, nor thinks his aid more necessary. George Washington, Letter to William Gordon, May 13th, 1776. Had the doctrines of Jesus been preached always as purely as they came from his lips, the whole civilized world would now have been Christian. Thomas Jefferson, Letter to Benjamin Waterhouse, June 26, 1822. Any system of religion that has anything in it that shocks the mind of a child cannot be a true system. Thomas Paine, The Age of Reason, 1794 to 1795. It does me no injury for my neighbor to say there are 20 gods or no God. Thomas Jefferson, Notes on the State of Virginia, 1782. Government has no right to hurt a hair of the head of an atheist for his opinions. Let him have a care of his practices. John Adams, Letter to John Quincy Adams, June 16, 1816. I never told my own religion, nor scrutinized that of another. I never attempted to make a convert, nor wished to change another's creed. I have ever judged of the religion of others by their lives, for it is in our lives, and not from our words, that our religion must be read. Thomas Jefferson, Letter to Margaret Bayard Smith, August 6, 1816. I have examined all religions, as well as my narrow sphere, my straitened means, and my busy life would allow, and the result is that the Bible is the best book in the world. It contains more philosophy than all the libraries I have seen. John Adams, Letter to Thomas Jefferson, December 25th, 1813. Here is my creed. I believe in one God, the creator of the universe, that he governs it by his providence, that he ought to be worshipped, that the most acceptable service we render to him is in doing good to his other children, that the soul of man is immortal, and will be treated with justice in another life, respecting its conduct in this, These I take to be the fundamental points in all sound religion, and I regard them as you do in whatever sect I meet with them. As to Jesus of Nazareth, my opinion of whom you particularly desire, I think the system of morals and his religion, as he left them to us, is the best the world ever saw or is likely to see. Benjamin Franklin, Letter to Ezra Stiles, March 9th, 1790. I believe in one God and no more, and I hope for happiness beyond this life. I believe in the equality of man, and I believe that religious duties consist in doing justice, loving mercy, and endeavoring to make our fellow creatures happy. Thomas Paine, The Age of Reason, 1794 to 1795. I consider the doctrines of Jesus as delivered by himself to contain the outlines of the sublimest system of morality that has ever been taught, but I hold in the most profound detestation and execration the corruptions of it which have been invented. Thomas Jefferson, Letter to Henry Fry, June 17th, 1804. No man complains of his neighbor for ill management of his affairs, for an error in sowing his land, or marrying his daughter, for consuming his substance in taverns. In all these he has liberty, but if he does not frequent the church, or then conform in ceremonies, there is an immediate uproar. Thomas Jefferson, Notes on the State of Virginia, 1782. No point of faith is so plain as that morality is our duty, for all sides agree in that. A virtuous heretic shall be saved before a wicked Christian. Benjamin Franklin, Dialogue Between Two Presbyterians, April 10th, 1735. Statesmen, my dear sir, may plan and speculate for liberty, but it is religion and morality alone which can establish the principles upon which freedom can securely stand. The only foundation of a free constitution is pure virtue, and if this cannot be inspired into our people in a greater measure than they have it now, they may change their rulers and the forms of government, but they will not obtain a lasting liberty. John Adams, Letter to Zabdiel Adams, June 21, 1776. We are firmly convinced that with nations as with individuals, our interests soundly calculated will ever be found inseparable from our moral duties. Thomas Jefferson, Second Inaugural Address, March 4th, 1805. Contrary habits must be broken and good ones acquired and established before we can have any dependence on a steady, uniform rectitude of conduct. Benjamin Franklin, Maxims and Morals, from Dr. Franklin, 1807. Have you ever found in history one single example of a nation thoroughly corrupted that was afterwards restored to virtue? And without virtue, there can be no political liberty. John Adams, Letter to Thomas Jefferson, December 21st, 1819. Virtue alone is sufficient to make a man great, glorious, and happy. Benjamin Franklin, Maxims and Morals, from Dr. Franklin, 1807. He who permits himself to tell a lie once finds it much easier to do it a second and third time, till at length it becomes habitual. He tells lies without attending to it, and truths without the world's believing him. This falsehood of the tongue leads to that of the heart, and in time depraves all its good dispositions. Thomas Jefferson, Letter to Peter Carr, August 19th, 1785. My father convinced me that nothing was useful which was not honest. Benjamin Franklin, Maxims and Morals, from Dr. Franklin, 1807. Let no pleasure tempt thee, no profit allure thee, no ambition corrupt thee, no example sway thee, no persuasion move thee to do anything which thou knowest to be evil. So thou shalt live jollily, for a good conscience is a continual Christmas. Benjamin Franklin, Maxims and Morals, from Dr. Franklin, 1807. Peace, War, and the Military. If there be a trouble, let it be in my day, that my child may have peace. Thomas Paine, The American Crisis, No. 1, December 19, 1776. To discerning men, nothing can be more evident than that a peace on the principles of dependence, however limited, would be to the last degree dishonorable and ruinous. George Washington, Letter to John Bannister, April 21, 1778. I rejoiced at the return of peace. We are now friends with England and with all mankind. I hope it will be lasting, and that mankind will at length, as they call themselves reasonable creatures, have reason and sense enough to settle their differences without cutting throats. May we never see another war, for in my opinion, there never was a good war or a bad peace. Benjamin Franklin, Letter to Josiah Quincy, September 11, 1783. There is nothing so likely to produce peace as to be well prepared to meet an enemy. George Washington, Letter to Elbridge Gerry, January 29, 1780. I have never known a peace made, even the most advantageous, that was not censured as inadequate, and the makers condemned as injudicious or corrupt. Blessed are the peacemakers, is, I suppose, to be understood in the other world, for in this they are frequently cursed. Benjamin Franklin, Letter to John Adams, October 12, 1781. Peace and friendship with all mankind is our wisest policy, and I wish we may be permitted to pursue it. Thomas Jefferson, Letter to Charles William Frederick Dumas, May 6, 1786. Peace with all the world is my sincere wish. I am sure it is our true policy, and am persuaded it is the ardent desire of the government. George Washington, Letter to Reverend Jonathan Boucher, August 15, 1798. I love peace, and I am anxious that we should give the world still another useful lesson by showing to them other modes of punishing injuries than by war, which is as much a punishment to the punisher as to the sufferer. Thomas Jefferson, Letter to Tench Cox, May 1, 1794. But by the all-powerful dispensations of Providence, I have been protected beyond all human probability or expectation, for I had 4 bullets through my coat and 2 horses shot under me, yet escaped unhurt, although death was leveling my companions on every side of me. George Washington, Letter to his brother, John A. Washington, describing the battle at the Monongahela during the French and Indian War, July 1755. Let me just look at that word. Monongahela. So strong is this propensity of mankind to fall into mutual animosities that where no substantial occasion presents itself, the most frivolous and fanciful distinctions have been sufficient to kindle their unfriendly passions and excite their most violent conflicts. James Madison, The Federalist Papers, 10 November 23, 1787. War involves in its progress such a train of unforeseen and unsupposed circumstances that no human wisdom can calculate the end. It has but one thing certain, and that is to increase taxes. Thomas Paine, Prospects on the Republican. I'm sorry. Oh my goodness, you can tell that my eyes are getting tired. Thomas Paine, Prospects on the Rubicon, 1787. So sorry about chopping that one up. It is the only object of war that makes it honorable, and if there was ever a just war since the world began, it is this in which America is now engaged. Thomas Paine, The American Crisis, No. 5, March 21st, 1778. Men may speculate as they will, they may talk of patriotism, they may draw a few examples from ancient story of great achievements performed by its influence, but whoever builds upon it as a sufficient basis for conducting a long and bloody war will find themselves deceived in the end. A great and lasting war can never be supported on this principle alone. It must be aided by a prospect of interest or some reward. For a time it may of itself push men to action, to bear much, to encounter difficulties, but it will not endure unassisted by interest. George Washington, Letter to John Bannister, April 21, 1778. In times of peace, the people look most to their representatives, but in war, to the executive solely. Thomas Jefferson, Letter to Caesar A. Rodney, February 10th, 1810. My first wish is to see this plague to mankind banished from off the earth, and the sons and daughters of this world employed in more pleasing and innocent amusements than in preparing implements and exercising them for the destruction of mankind. George Washington, Letter to David Humphreys, July 25th, 1785. I have seen enough of one war never to wish to see another. Thomas Jefferson, Letter to John Adams, April 25th, 1794. Be it remembered then that there are tumults, seditions, popular commotions, insurrections, and civil wars upon just occasions as well as unjust. John Adams, Novangelis Papers, 1774. Whensoever hostile aggressions require a resort to war, we must meet our duty and convince the world that we are just friends and brave enemies. Thomas Jefferson, Letter to Andrew Jackson, December 3rd, 1806. Discipline is the soul of an army. It makes small numbers formidable, procures success to the weak, and esteem to all. George Washington, Letter of Instructions to the Captains of the Virginia Regiments, July 29th, 1759. The only way to form an army to be confided in was a systematic discipline by which means all men may be made heroes. John Adams, quoted in Ralph Waldo Emerson's journal, August 1851. Every citizen should be a soldier. This was the case with the Greeks and the Romans, and must be that of every free state. Thomas Jefferson, Letter to James Monroe, 1813. For a people who are free and who mean to remain so, a well-organized and armed militia is their best security. Thomas Jefferson, Message to Congress, November 8, 1808. To place any dependence upon militia is, assuredly, resting upon a broken staff. George Washington, Letter to the President of Congress, Heights of Harlem, September 24th, 1776. A navy is our natural and only defense. John Adams, Letter to Congress, 1780. Without a decisive naval force, we can do nothing definitive, and with it, everything honorable and glorious. George Washington, Letter to Marquis de Lafayette, November 15, 1781. Perhaps no country ever experienced more sudden and remarkable advantages from any measure of policy than we have derived from the arming of our maritime protections and defense. John Adams, State of the Union Address, December 8, 1798. The national defense must be provided for as well as the support of government, but both should be accomplished as much as possible by immediate taxes and as little as possible by loans. John Adams, State of the Union Address, November 12, 1797. Overgrown military establishments are under any form of government inauspicious to liberty, and are to be regarded as particularly hostile to republican liberty. George Washington, Farewell Address, September 17th, 1796. The spirit of this country is totally adverse to a large military force. Thomas Jefferson, letter to Chandler Price, February 28, 1807. Politics and patriotism. Politics are such a torment that I would advise everyone that I love not to mix with them. Thomas Jefferson, letter to Martha Jefferson Randolph, February 11, 1800. I agree with you that in politics the middle way is none at all. John Adams, letter to Horatio Gates, March 23, 1776. Politics, like religion, hold up the torches of martyrdom to the reformers of error. Thomas Jefferson, letter to James Ogilvy, August 4, 1811. No sooner has one party discovered or invented an amelioration of the condition of man. Amelioration. Oh gosh, my tongue just can't say that word. Amelioration of the condition of man or the order of society, then the opposite party bellies it, misconstrues it, misrepresents it, ridicules it, insults it, and persecutes it. John Adams, letter to Thomas Jefferson, July 9th, 1813. Let me read that again. I'm so sorry for butchering that. It's just my eyes are a little bit tired. I should probably stop now, but I'd like to continue because I'm really enjoying this. No sooner has one party discovered or invented an amelioration of the condition of man or the order of society than the opposite party belies it, misconstrues it, misrepresents it, ridicules it, insults it, and persecutes it. John Adams, letter to Thomas Jefferson, July 9th, 1813. If I could not go to heaven but with a party, I would not go there at all. Thomas Jefferson, letter to Francis Hopkinson, March 13th, 1789. The spirit of party serves always to distract the public councils and enfeeble the public administration. It agitates the community with ill-founded jealousies and false alarms, kindles the animosity of one part against another, foments occasionally riot and insurrection. George Washington, Farewell Address, September 1796. Men, by their constitutions, are naturally divided into two parties. 1. Those who fear and distrust the people and wish to draw all powers from them into the hands of the higher classes. 2. Those who identify themselves with the people, have confidence in them, cherish and consider them as the most honest and safe, although not the most wise depository of the public interests. In every country, these two parties exist, and in every one where they are free to think, speak, and write, they will declare themselves. Thomas Jefferson, letter to Henry Lee, August 10th, 1824. Men often oppose a thing merely because they have had no agency in planning it, or because it has been planned by those whom they dislike. Alexander Hamilton, The Federalist Papers, number 70, 1788. If the present Congress errs in too much talking, how can it be otherwise in a body to which the people send 150 lawyers, whose trade it is to question everything, yield nothing, and talk by the hour? The 150 lawyers should do business together ought not to be expected. Thomas Jefferson, from his autobiography. When a man assumes a public trust, he should consider himself as public property. Thomas Jefferson, remark to Baron von Humboldt, quoted in Rayner, Life of Jefferson, 1834. My country has, in its wisdom, contrived for me the most insignificant office, the vice presidency, that ever the invention of man contrived or his imagination conceived. John Adams, letter to Abigail Adams, December 19th, 1793. If a due participation of office is a matter of right, how are vacancies to be obtained? Those by death are few, by resignation none. Thomas Jefferson, letter to E. Shipman, July 12, 1801. I have heard of some great man, whose rule it was, with regard to offices, never to ask for them, and never to refuse them, to which I have always added, in my own practice, never to resign them. Benjamin Franklin, letter to Mrs. Jane Meekum, March 1st, 1766. Whenever a man has cast a longing eye on offices, a rottenness begins in his conduct. Thomas Jefferson, letter to Tench Cox, 1799. Be a listener only. Keep within yourself, and endeavor to establish with yourself the habit of silence, especially on politics. In the fevered state of our country, no good can ever result from any attempt to set one of these fiery zealots to rights. Either in fact or principle, they are determined as to the facts they will believe and the opinions on which they will act. Get by them, therefore, as you would be an angry bull. It is not for a man of sense to dispute the road with such an animal. Thomas Jefferson, letter to his grandson, Thomas Jefferson Randolph, November 24th, 1808. Citizens by birth or choice of a common country, that country has a right to concentrate your affections. The name of American, which belongs to you in your national capacity, must always exalt the just pride of patriotism more than any appellation derived from local discriminations. George Washington, Farewell Address, September 17, 1796. Our obligations to our country never cease but with our lives. John Adams, letter to Benjamin Rush, April 18, 1808. My affections were first for my country, and then, generally, for all mankind. Thomas Jefferson, letter to Thomas Law, January 15, 1811. Guard against the impostures of pretended patriotism. George Washington, Farewell Address, September 17, 1796. It is in the man of piety and inward principle that we may expect to find the uncorrupted patriot, the useful citizen, and the invincible soldier. God grant that in America true religion and civil liberty may be inseparable, and that the unjust attempts to destroy the one may in the issue tend to support and establish the both. John Witherspoon, from his sermon on May 17, 1776. The patriot, like the Christian, must learn that to bear revilings and persecutions is a part of his duty, and in proportion as the trial is severe, firmness under it becomes more requisite and praiseworthy. Thomas Jefferson, letter to James Sullivan, May 21st, 1805. Gentlemen, you will permit me to put on my spectacles, for I have grown not only gray, but almost blind in the service of my country. George Washington, searching for his glasses before delivering the Newburgh Address, March 15, 1783. Family and friends. Is there no way for two friendly souls to converse together, although the bodies are 400 miles off? Yes, by letter, but I want a better communication. I want to hear you think, or to see your thoughts. John Adams, letter to Abigail Adams, from the Continental Congress, 1776. She proved a good and faithful helpmate, assisted me by attending the shop. We throve together and have ever mutual endeavored to make each other happy. Benjamin Franklin about his wife, Deborah, from his autobiography. It gives me more pleasure than I can express to learn that you sustain with so much fortitude the shocks and terrors of the times. You are really brave, my dear. You are a heroine, and you have reason to be, for the worst that can happen can do you no harm. A soul as pure, as benevolent, as virtuous and pious as yours has nothing to fear, but everything to hope and expect from the last of human evils. John Adams, Letter to Abigail Adams, July 7th, 1775, referring to the Battle of Bunker Hill that Abigail watched with John Quincy from a hill near their home. Good wives and good plantations are made by good husbands. Benjamin Franklin, Maxims and Morals from Dr. Franklin, 1807. Where there's marriage without love, there will be love without marriage. Benjamin Franklin, Poor Richard's Almanac, May 1734. Keep your eyes open before marriage, half shut after. I'm so sorry. Oh my goodness, forgive me. How unprofessional. I will reread that one. Okay. Okay. I know it must be getting very late. Oh dear, forgive me. Oh my. Keep your eyes open before marriage, half shut afterwards. Benjamin Franklin, Maxims and Morals from Dr. Franklin, 1807. I tell you, I'm so sorry. Oh my goodness. That one just triggered me. The married state is, after all our jokes, the happiest, being comfortable to our natures. Man and woman have, each of them, qualities and tempers in which the other is deficient, and which in union contribute to the common felicity. Single and separate, they are not the complete human being. They are like the odd halves of scissors. They cannot answer the end of their formation. Benjamin Franklin, Letter to a Young Man, June 25th, 1745. My enthusiasm for sports and inattention to books alarmed my father, and he frequently entered into conversation with me upon the subject. I told him I did not love books and wished he would lay aside the thought of sending me to college. What would you do, child? Be a farmer? A farmer? Well, I will show you what it is to be a farmer. You shall go with me to Penny Ferry tomorrow morning and help me get thatch. I shall be very glad to go, sir. Accordingly, next morning he took me with him, and with great good humor kept me all day with him at work. At night at home he said, "Well, John, are you satisfied with being a farmer?" Though the labor had been very hard and very muddy, I answered, "I like it very well, sir." "Aye, but I don't like it well. So you shall go to school today." I went, but was not happy, as at the creek thatch. John Adams, from his autobiography. John has genius, and so has Charles. Take care that they don't go astray. Cultivate their minds, inspire their little hearts, raise their wishes, fix their attention upon great and glorious objects. Root out every little thing, weed out every meanness. Make them great and manly. Teach them to scorn injustice, ingratitude, cowardice, and falsehood. Let them revere nothing but religion, morality, and liberty. John Adams, Letter to Abigail Adams, April 15th, 1776. I rather wish that he might lead a good life, a life of a little indulgence and dissipation, as should be thought necessary to relax and keep his spirits. He is to be restrained from the practice of those follies and vices which youth and inexperience but too naturally lead into. George Washington, Letter to Reverend Jonathan Boucher, 1768, about the schooling of his stepson, Jack Custis. Teach your child to hold his tongue. He'll learn fast enough to speak. Benjamin Franklin, Poor Richard's Almanac, 1734. At my father's table he liked to have, as often as he would, or could, some sensible friend or neighbor to converse with, and always took care to start some ingenious or useful topic for discourse, which might tend to improve the minds of his children. By this means he turned our attention to what was good, just, and prudent in the conduct of life. And little or no notice was ever taken of what related to the victuals on the table, whether it was well or ill-dressed, in or out of season, of good or bad flavor, preferably or inferior to this or that other thing of the kind, so that I was brought up in such a perfect inattention to these matters as to be quite indifferent to what kind of food was set before me, and so unobservant of it that to this day, if I am asked, I can scarcely tell a few hours after dinner what I dined upon. Benjamin Franklin, from his autobiography. As much as I converse with sages and heroes, they have very little of my love and admiration. I long for rural and domestic scene, for the warbling of birds and the prattling of my children. John Adams, Letter to Abigail Adams, March 16th, 1777. The happiest moments of my life have been the few which I have passed at home in the bosom of my family. Thomas Jefferson, Letter to Francis Willis, Jr., April 18th, 1790. 'Tis true, the regard and friendship I met with from persons of worth, and the conversation of ingenious men, gave me no small pleasure, but at that time of life domestic comforts afforded the most solid satisfaction, and my uneasiness at being absent from my family, and longing desire to be with them, made me often sigh in the midst of cheerful company. Benjamin Franklin, recalling a trip to London in 1757 from his autobiography. I must study politics and war, that my sons may have the liberty to study mathematics and philosophy, geography, natural history, and naval architecture, navigation, commerce, and agriculture, in order to give their children a right to study painting, poetry, music, architecture, statuary, tapestry, and porcelain. John Adams, Letter to Abigail Adams, May 12th, 1780. All who saw my grandson Benny agreed of his being an uncommonly fine boy, which brought often afresh to my mind the idea of my son Frankie's, though dead many years ago, whom I have seldom since seen equaled in everything, and whom to